Okay.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Naked Truths, brought to you by Naked Dog. Dog food as it should be, and these are canine conversations as they should be, because we are really delving into a lot of topics. Brendan and I were just screening back on some of the topics that we've brought over to you, and just amazing, really. I mean, we've had all about vaccines, canine cancers, how to spot silent pain in your dog, how to avoid dog theft. I mean, that's one of the most viewed ones. So very, very lucky, aren't you guys, that we brought you all these amazing topics. And today I am here with Brendan Clarke, who is a vet. Some of you may know him because he's featured on some videos lately on Dr. Nick Thompson's page. So you're getting to know him. And he's got lots and lots of information to share with us about bacteria in raw dog food. But before we do that, I just want to remind everyone, or a couple of little news items, really. So remind everyone that our food is available at stockists up and down the country in the UK. We are heading to Scotland in the next month or so as well. So we have found a way to reach you guys, because I know so many of you have been asking for stockists up in that area. So that's good news. And also wanted to say a big well done to Rachel and Sasha from Norfolk, who were the winners of our year's worth of Naked Dog Raw. And one of the best things I think about it is that Sasha must have entered. Rachel didn't know that she'd won raw dog food, so lucky Sasha. She's very, very pleased, and Sasha, I think, has swung one over there. I think you've actually got a black Labrador yourself, haven't you?
Yeah, I do. Pippa. Yeah,
Pippa.
Yeah,
I remember.
And I've got a spaniel as well. This is Artie.
Okay, I don't know. I don't remember. Is it Marty or Barty, did you say?
Artie.
Oh,
so
Artie.
She's Artemis. Yeah, so she's a Springer who's actually with me on the floor. And if I just do this, Artie.
We get to meet her. Oh, bless her. Look. She's young.
Artie in the flesh.
She's ever so sweet. Look at her. Look at that lovely shiny coat.
You see, so she's always with me. She's my little companion, does everything alongside me. So off you get. Yeah. So she's usually curled up at my feet whenever she can.
A daddy's girl.
Yeah, it's the one.
Okay, so first of all, for those who don't know you, just give us a little bit of background, why it is that you are passionate about raw feeding as a vet.
Okay, well, 25 years ago, joined Towerwood. They'd already been feeding raw for quite a while. Went into being a holistic vet as well, so doing a lot of homeopathy, herbal medicine, acupuncture, and so diet is just so important and integral to health that actually that's what we were doing. And we were doing a lot of bath advice, for Billinghurst type stuff, putting people off to some degree as well, because there's so much, let's make every single meal ground down to the last. And so many people were doing it themselves, so they needed that instruction. Mm-hmm. And then over the years, we've sort of tinkered with that. And, from a point of view of feeding raw ourselves, we were saying, well, we weren't really doing the Billinghurst in that nth degree of grinding stuff down. And so we ended up sort of like just simplifying it for people. For those that wanted it done for you, there are obviously one or two in those days companies that were making foods, but the majority who were doing a plan of, what do I do over a month? Well, just vary the diet. So it's very much about getting a bit more variety in there. We relaxed people into raw feed feeding a lot more, and we found that so many people really started to get engaged with getting food, proper food for their pets. And that's really the start of my raw journey. Obviously, opening the meetings with Nick on the RFVS, and more recently, I've just done a presidency of the Raw Feeding Veterinary Society, on the back of which we're also launching Raw Safe, which is something we'll talk about later. And then we've got a few bits to do with Connor and Nick, who you've had on, I know already. We're doing a series with regards to Raw Pet Medics. So, you know, if you want to catch us on a Friday Night Live, that's where we'll be, doing a few other videos in between on that page, and also doing a little bit with Bella and Duke. We've done some stuff with them too, just to get the information out there. I mean, really, I think the great thing about the raw community is we're all working together to just advance people's knowledge about proper feeding.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, it's much needed as well, because it isn't just the veterinary profession that seem to have a real bee in their bonnet about the bacteria. That does trickle down to us as dog owners as well, and we can feel a sense of concern about that as well. Do you feel that the veterinary side of things, that nowadays perhaps the manufacturing of raw dog food has moved on, and they might be still in a little bit in the dark about just how far it has come along in terms of the, you know, really focusing on eliminating or reducing bacteria? You know, maybe in the past, historically, it wasn't really an industry known for that.
Yeah, I think, how would I would say, you know, from a raw food feeding side of things, so I've got a terrible echo, so there's something just going on in this side of things, so it's just distracting us.
You've got us open on your phone, maybe.
I don't think so. Let me just unplug something. 1 second.
Sorry everyone, we're just yeah, I've not got Facebook open on my computer, so it's not coming from here. Do post your questions for Brendan, because as always, I will go through the comments about halfway through, and we shall definitely answer questions if you've got any worries at all about transitioning, or any thoughts that you might have on the bacterial load of food, or, you know, that kind of thing. Obviously,
sorry about that. Just yeah, there's I unplugged a separate speaker that was just for some reason delayed by yeah, I refuse to open the Facebook page, so you'll have to read out the comments, just because I know that it will start off another thing. But yes,
that's cool.
Computer set up, we have separate speakers, and for some reason there was a delay. Ask that last question again, and then I'll go through.
So yeah, I'm wondering if the veterinary profession in particular, they're not really aware of the regulations and the changes that really have been made. As raw pet food has got more and more commercial, obviously it's needed to happen. So could their fears really be quite historic, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, when we started out, there was definitely some companies that, you know, if you did your due diligence, you just wouldn't advise going to for their food. And, you know, some of those have emerged over recent years as well. And I would always implore people that, you know, if you really want to know what is going into your pet, you know, make sure that you know the company like yours, you know, what's going on behind the scenes, what, you know, how that food is produced. And I think historically things were left a little bit to, well, look, yeah, you're just producing food, off you go. And then there's been one or two scare stories with regards to some of the bacterial outbreaks, and, you know, fingers pointed, and, you know, a lot more has been brought in about, well, what do we need to do if there isn't a kill step? Let's talk about that in a moment. And then from a point of view of making sure that actually we've almost become defensive now as to, you know, trying to make sure that we've got the nth degree of controls in our foods, some for the better, and some, you know, is actually just a bit overkill on that, so that we can be sure that we're giving safe foods to our dogs.
Yes. So, I mean, in terms of talking about that kill step, I personally, one of the things I will sort of explain to people is just how much of a kill step your dog's stomach acid can be for that bacteria. I think that can be really misunderstood because obviously, as humans, we don't have that capability. So we're really sort of putting that belief system onto a different kind of animal.
Absolutely right. You know, I mean, to have a pH down at 1 to 2 in the stomach rather than, you know, a human stomach's up at sort of 4, 5, you know, it's another degree. And don't forget, that's not a linear scale either. You know, that's a scale which, you know, for the pH scale, just means that you've got super concentration of acid going on. Now, for a normal dog's stomach, they can cope with that. It's proper for, you know, getting rid of a lot of the bacteria that they may scavenge from under the hedge. Does have some implications when we talk about probiotics and how they should get through, but readily, you know, as a primary defense mechanism, absolutely brilliant. I think one of the things that a lot of the meat inspectors and the health inspectors are really worried about, listening to them, it's just about where it's going to be in the fridge. You know, they're super worried that actually, you know, they'll talk about this kill step of cooking for human food and allow there to be, you know, 10, 100 times more bacteria sometimes on human foods in the supermarket. I hope this isn't turning you guys off at all. But realistically, they're just saying, well, you're cooking it. But then they complain that actually it's about where it's stored. And, you know, is it safe to be in the fridge? Well, actually, all of you guys who are eating meat, and I'm sure there's plenty of you guys vegetarians, I'm going to show something about that in a moment. But for those of you who store meat, it's about how you do it properly, how you do it safely. And remember, you know, that you haven't had your food go through a kill step by the time it goes into your fridge. So, you know, realistically, we're here to educate everybody about making sure that, look, please make sure that it goes into the fridge in a lower shelf, even into one of the drawers. Now, I know they call them salad drawers, but honestly, you know, I would say they're the best place for the meat to go because they're usually right at the bottom of the fridge, well out of the way. They're in a plastic container that you can regularly take out and wash, okay? And you can store all of your meats in that tray at the bottom, and then put your salads elsewhere, you know, from a point of view of keeping them safe. Okay, but really, you know, that means that there should be no worries about what you're feeding to your dog, what you're feeding to you, and make sure that when you're finished preparing the raw meat, that, you know, that food, if it's for you, you're cooking it, or it's going into the dog's bowl, that you wash your hands thoroughly and you're washing down everything you can that's there, including the dog's bowl. And if you've got a dishwasher, that's a great way to just sterilize it at the end of the meal. So, you know, it's good control.
Yes, yeah. I think hygiene, we have to do it anyway when we're preparing our own meat, which is, you know, essentially what you're saying. And it's so key to understand that we're already doing this for ourselves. So to then do that for our dogs, the benefits that come from feeding raw far outweigh the fact that you've got to wash your hands more often or wash your utensils more often. I think
COVID has taught us a lot, though, that so many people are doing that anyway. So, you know, from that side of things, you know, is it really going to be a problem? Really interesting there, I'm sure Nick's talked about this, and Connor and any of the vets that are out there, you know, is really that research that was done by Dogs Risk on the 16,500, you know, pet owners with, you know, 90,000 years of experience, and looking at the real risk. You know, this is not a small study, the real risk of bacteria. So not that we found a certain subtype of a sugar toxin releasing E. coli and we traced something similar to a food line that could have been related to this, and it affected one person out of the 70 million in the UK. Right. You know, okay, that's a risk. And yes, we need to be aware of how some of these things could get through to us, you know, but not investigating some of the other sources of that risk it just skewed everything. Whereas the one from Helsinki, the Dogs Risk, you know, Helsinki University did a really good in-depth view of what is the real risk. And when you get that many thousand animals being fed, and you find that actually only a small proportion, less than a dozen, that actually could be proven to come from the food that they were feeding, and actually those cases were in the prevalence where people were feeding waste food from their fridge, stuff that had gone out of date for themselves, and they were giving those to the dogs, not because of the raw food that we're doing. In fact, actually, the converse was true. The health of the families that were feeding proper raw actually went up. They were better. They were less likely to get sick, less likely to get tummy bugs. And it's just, those are the messages that we need to get across.
This study is available to see somewhere, is it? Can we maybe put a link to it?
Yeah, absolutely. You should be able to go, you should be able to get the link for the dog's risk. If you can't, you can also go through, I think the RFVS .info site updated their position statement, and I believe it's in there under bacteria risk. So you can always find it through that. There's lots of information in there, just outside of the very brief resume that I gave it there, which, including things like, actually, you're more at risk from bacteria if you send your kids to nursery. Can you believe it? It's one of those. We haven't put a ban on that yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's so interesting though with this idea that when I was a kid, we would be playing in hay bales, making mud pies, or like, kids just don't do this anymore. And there's that argument that children that have grown up on a farm have a better immune system. They have more diverse microbiome, perhaps because they've grown up on the farm. And this strikes me as something we should be thinking about as well, rather than kind of really trying to really control everything and reduce our exposure. It's thinking about what can we do to actually build the dog's immune system, really. How can we improve that?
Build all of our immune systems, as you say. The kids on the farm, it's literally is, we went through a period of actually in the early 1900s, people realized the link to things like mental health, to just how good your microbiome is for you. And actually, we then went through the First World War. We started to get into penicillins, antibiosis. This is a way to save lives. Bacteria are bad. There was no, it's the whole COVID message all over again. Keep it simple, people will understand. So what did they do? They kept it simple to bacteria are bad. It was literally that. They threw the baby out with the bathwater. And so, we need to, get hold of that message and say, actually, no, there are certain situations that certain bacteria can be bad, but actually there are far more beneficial ones that actually make us healthier, are actually part of our immune systems. They stop us getting fungal infections. They help us digest things. They actually stop us getting aberrant bacteria into our guts if we've got good ones in place of them. So we need to really start grasping the nettle here of saying, look, there are loads of good bacteria. And actually some of those horrible words like salmonella, like E. coli, people have got to realize there are loads of species which are absolutely harmless out there that are actually in your backyard. They're everywhere. And actually it's nothing that's going to cause you a problem. There are some specific subtypes which actually can cause quite severe illness if your gut isn't already in a good shape. And that's why not everybody will go down with an illness in an outbreak. You'll often find that it's those that are susceptible. So a big difference between bacteria are bad and a very complex, right, now we need to work out which are the good friendlies and which are the ones we've got to avoid.
Yes. Well, Louis Pasteur famously said, didn't he, on his deathbed, that it's the host. It's the host. I think this is one of the reasons why animals like dogs will scavenge, because it's like an inborn instinct to create diversity. And they want to, they're almost attracted to this food that's on the floor maybe, or in the park, because it's like an innate knowing that they need to raise that diversity of bacteria within them. You know, it's not just about they're hungry that time, they really are attracted to that kind of vital force that the bacteria almost bring to the food, which obviously we've stripped right out by sterilizing pet foods. So they're then attracted to that vital force of that, the kitchen bin or whatever it is they might find.
But there are all sorts of other nutrients that those bacteria will be releasing in that, you know, putrefaction. And the thing is that we sometimes assume that it's them getting a probiotic in that form, but actually you've named already the kill step of the stomach acid, which will wipe out a huge amount if it's a true meal.
Yes.
And so there are some really important things around, if you're going to give a probiotic, about what the timing of that, how those bacteria have to get through the stomach without the stomach releasing loads of acid. So you can't really be just chucking it into their main meal and hoping that it's going to be fine. Yes. Unless you've got specific sporulated forms. Okay, so that's where they're coated and they're ready for actually getting into the small intestine to receive chemical starters that release them from the spore and allow them to start reproducing. Or that they're going to have some form of mini meal, if you like, or drink that allows them to bring on those bacteria without it going through a digestive process, you know. So the stomach's really intelligent, and it can, you know, if it doesn't detect a meal, but it just detects some throughput, then, so like when you drink water, you don't suddenly go into an acid release and everything else. You can actually get some of those gut bacteria re-established through those options. So there are a couple of ways to cheat, you know, kefir drinks, you know, we've talked about, you know, mini meals, you know, treats that have these things in, so that they're just trying to passage very quickly. You know, certain water sources will have these, so certainly drinking in certain places will help to repopulate the gut. But using these sporulated, you know, probiotics are really useful too. So, you know, when you're looking at the probiotics, when your dog's had an upset tummy, just be a wee bit mindful as to why they may not work if they are just lactobacilli shoved in a powder.
Yeah, I mean, because obviously it's going to get killed off in the stomach acid. So I guess what you're saying is it's better to either have a capsule which is going to be protected from the pH of the dog's stomach acid. Now, I remember about sort of 6 years ago-ish, I spoke to Biocult about this, and they said that their capsules had been tested to withstand the pH of the dogs, which is obviously more acidic than ours. So they're made for people, but they had actually withstood you know, a stronger acid. So that's interesting. And I'm presuming definitely it's got to, like, you know, the brands like Fidospore, they've got to have achieved this, because they do such wonderful things.
Especially Fidospore, which Fido is just because they literally did the test for dogs. You know, they made it very specific for dogs. And sporulating it, you know, making sure that it was in that sporulated capsule. Each bacterium can cope, so you can empty those capsules through, okay, because they're sporulated. And some probiotics out there will do that, okay? So just look to make sure that they have protected them to get through the stomach acid. It's just obviously the lower cost you go, often it's those that will reflect that actually they've just chucked loads of bacteria in and let's hope it works.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. That makes sense that would happen. It's one of the reasons I quite like prebiotics. I saw a study on BBC Two many years ago, like 15 years ago probably, and they had a set of people eating prebiotics like dandelion leaves. This was like a weekend or 4-day study, dandelion leaves, berries, this sort of thing. And they had another set of people that were given the probiotics as a supplement. And guess which ones had a greater presence and a more balanced microbiome? The ones with the prebiotics, because give the body the chance and it will sort itself out, rather than saying, oh, I think you only need this one bacteria or these couple of bacteria, these are the ones that are missing, when actually it might not be the case at all.
And there's some great prebiotics out there that are very specific to farm some of the really beneficial bacteria. Okay, so the ones which actually will promote good, healthy growth of other bacteria around them as well. And so looking at those prebiotics, not just as a general oligosaccharide, but actually looking at some of the, micronutrients you'll find in some of the apple pectins or the blueberry and things like that, extracts that you can get, can actually, almost self-select for those really beneficial bacteria. There's only one exception. For your viewers out there, there's one exception to that little story, and that is that actually if you've got very young dogs or animals that have actually had their primary bacteria depleted massively, maybe through antibiotics, or they've been born by cesarean section, then it's really important that they do get a little bit of both initially. But when you've got some good bacteria already in your gut, to give those prebiotics, absolutely great. Yeah, I absolutely back you up on that.
Yeah. So I just want to, I know what I would say, but really interesting to hear what you would say. One of the biggest concerns that I've heard repeatedly for many, many years, my dog has a sensitive stomach. And now I do believe there's kind of two types of sensitive stomach, one to bone content and one to bacteria, that don't always come together. And sometimes the poor dog's got both. But, just talking about the bacteria side of things, what would you say to someone whose dog has, or they're worried their dog's got a sensitive stomach to bacteria, and then as a result can't have raw?
Yeah, okay. So it's not that they've got necessarily a sensitive stomach to bacteria. It can often be the type of microflora they've already got. So some of the sensitivities actually come from, there being too many yeasts in there. There's a classic leaky gut syndrome, which is actually down to certain bacteria, but especially yeasts, causing the junction between the cells in the gut to actually start to open up and allow materials, including some of the foods they're then feeding, to actually be stimulating the immune system and some of the cascades, which is the inflammatory process, so the innate immune system, to cause contact sensitivity. So that's the difference between just a hypersensitivity to certain things and a allergy that you can get in the longer term. And all of those can be just actually down to what's going on with your gut flora, not down to what you're feeding. So I think, primary thing for those people that've got dogs with sensitive tummies is just investigate what might be going on there. Have you got a bacterial overgrowth? Have you got yeasts? Look at some of the stool samples. There's some great people out there that do, microbiome checks now for your dog. So that you can see what's in there, and they will look not just what can be cultured, but what genetically they can see, and give you some advice on those prebiotics as to how to sway that, and actually really put some hard work into changing the microflora, rather than thinking I can't feed a particular thing. Now, giving raw, the great things are you're also decreasing things like the wheat and cereals and corn and things like that in there, that also absolutely will cause some problems with those junctions opening up, causing more inflammation inherently in the food. So avoiding some of those. 99% of raw feeding does avoid those things anyway, so you're going to be beneficial feeding raw rather than causing a problem.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if people really need to source some good probiotics or prebiotics prior to switching the dog, or use them alongside that kind of protocol, you'd say?
Yeah, and I talk a lot about bone broth. It's one of my pet things because I love bone broths for this, but loads of people think, well, it's because we've cooked something that then generates lots of nutrients that is going to be really beneficial to the dog, and soothe them into taking these nutrients on. And actually, one of the biggest benefits of bone broth is that you release lots of things which are really beneficial to the microflora, the gut flora of dogs. So it's almost a prebiotic in itself. And that's exactly what you were saying. Think, guys, about sourcing a good prebiotic, something that's going to set your dog's gut up, its gut flora up, before you then get into raw food feeding.
Yeah, and then do the switch. Yeah, which will benefit the dog immensely. I'm going to have a quick look and see what comments we've got. Who's here? Who's saying hello? And in the meantime, I tell you what I'll do, Brendan. I will share my screen and that lovely picture that I found earlier. That
Shall we talk about vegetables? Yeah.
See that? Can you see that?
Can indeed.
You
So
can't.
guys, this is while Caroline's looking at the questions, this is something that we really should be aware of, that actually the amount of vegetable matter that actually has bacteria on which can cause illnesses, and just see how much of that is actually because of non-meat origins. And this is why, your vegetable matter that gets fertilized in the field is so important to, peel that, wash that, do all of that stuff. Now, people hate to peel their veg because they say all of the best nutrients are in the peelings. Well, you should at least scrub them in these circumstances, unless you know how they've fertilized those fields. But even for organics, think about what they're going to organically fertilize that crop with. Yeah, it can be an eye-opener to understand that actually you might have higher bacterial levels.
I mean, 35.2% there with things other than meat. I mean, you got 21.9.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about pork for a minute. Kind of not so much of an issue now, but people did used to sort of think that pork had a funny bacteria or wasn't great for dogs. I'm sure that was a bit of a thing.
So the thing about pork is a virus called Algiestes, which is something called pseudo-rabies. So in the really early 80s, in fact, late 70s, there were a couple of cases that were outbreaks in East Germany. And actually, I was talking to a colleague of mine who comes from Romania, and they still occasionally see this. So if you feed that pork that's infected raw, then they can get these, sudden rage syndromes and various symptoms, which looks like rabies but isn't. It's a viral infection. So they talk about really cooking your pork. Now, actually, it's not something that's been seen in Western Europe for over 30 years now. So the likelihood of your pork in the UK being this problem at all is just, it's off the charts. Now, I don't know of any companies that are importing their pork from the Middle East or even the Far East or even Eastern Europe into the UK in these circumstances. But, Facebook reaches far wider than just the UK. So there may be people, in other continents around the world that sort of look at this, and in those circumstances, pork may not be your best option. It's all of these, there's a story behind why some of the religions out there won't eat certain meats, and that is because there's certain diseases in certain areas of the world that actually would make it harmful for the flock, the people following that religion, to eat those things. It's about simplicity of message. It's really hard to explain how certain meats could cause you to have a problem. So make it simple, make a simple message for people to follow is how they did it.
Okay. We've had some comments, quite a lot actually. Okay. So we've got one about shedding. So this is, I think, the fear of the dog having bacteria on it in some way, whether it's from the stools, whether that's licking somebody, or what would you say to this?
Okay, so again, host is so important. So it's going to be relative to your environment. And so if you're a young, healthy individual, then the likelihood that you're going to pick this up from your dog is just, minuscule. And again, the dog risk, look at that, because that had a whole range of families, from young families through to elderly within that study. And actually the the total number of cases reported where they even suspected that it could be to do with the food was in the region of about 65 out of 16,500 cases, of which only that half dozen or so were proven to be the food. So, you know, in real terms, that's a minuscule risk, a really minuscule risk. So, you know, people say, would I let Artie? Well, we saw right at the beginning of the interview, you know, Artie jumps on my lap and licks my face. Is she raw fed? Yes. Does she eat the odd pheasant from the field that, you know, somebody on the shoot has left behind? Yes, she does. You know, it's one of those things. She catches rabbits and will demolish them. You know, she's all of that side of things, but she doesn't get tummy upsets. And we don't, as a family, get tummy upsets. You know, it is about strength of the microbiome and just making sure that that's really there. So if you're at risk, at high risk, I think the bigger thing is make sure about your own personal hygiene. Okay, by all means, you know, you might want to be thinking about if they've just eaten, give them a little bit of time, you know, just to do their own cleaning up, because, you know, if they've been holding the bone between their paws, you know, and you don't want to be eating your tea and biscuits and then, you know, holding their paw and then carry on eating, you know, all of that side of things is to be thought about. But I think realistically, in the grand scheme of things, the risk, as the dog risk one showed, is so low that realistically it's not on the scale of you need to be, you know, you're more likely to actually go out and get run over if you don't look both ways at the road crossing. Look both ways, you know, it's
Yes. We've had also obviously people commenting as well about, you know, even dogs that are kibble fed, they'll eat other dogs' poo, they're sniffing each other's bottoms, they're treading on the soil, of course. So there's so many other ways bacteria can...
And scavenging from stuff under the park bench, you know, that kebab that's been left from the night before. God only knows what's in that. I mean...
So actually somebody's saying, why do dogs eat their own or some other dog's poo? It probably depends on what the dog's been fed. I'd still say that that's to do with they're attracted to the bacterial load.
Yeah, to some degree. I think there's a load of things. If it's another dog's feces that's being fed on kibble, don't forget they put lots of artificial flavorings in there that do not get deactivated by the gut digestion of the dog. So what ends up happening? The poop smells and still tastes of all of those flavor enhancers that they've been sticking in the kibble.
Exactly. So Karen is asking, where can she find more info on the microbiome tests that you mentioned?
Okay, so if you just put in pet biome, you'll come up. There's those guys are within the UK. I think they do their testing at Aberystwyth University. So, you know, it's not just a sort of, oh, let's just swill things around and have a little look. You know, it's a really in-depth, you know, blast it, look at the genetic code that's within the bacterial load. So it's not just sending stuff to your vet who would send it to a lab and get it cultured. This is not about that. This is about looking at the whole balance of microbiome within the gut. So yeah, a bit of a shout out to the pet biome guys, but they do a really good job. It takes a little bit of time. I think it does take up to 12 weeks to get a result back. So this is not something you send off and get back within 24 hours.
My guess is as well that what we don't want to be doing is try to over control and find out about every tiny little thing about our dog with a view that if we know it, then we can fix it, because the body has its own way of achieving balance. So it's
like, you know, there is something really important. Really important to get across, and that is that, you know, in the 20s, after the flu epidemic that happened after the First World War, and with all of the injuries that were happening and the chronic disease that was around in the 1920s, so 100 years ago now, there were some studies made by some doctors who actually also knew a little bit about homeopathy, and they looked at how the bowel flora changes dependent on your mental health, your general health, your well-being. This is where we come up with the remedies for bowel nosodes that actually reflect your constitution. So, you know, what makes you you is actually a big part is your microbiome. So understanding that actually not every dog's microbiome needs to be cloned and it has to be exactly the same. But, you know, if your dog's ill, there may be some adjustments that can be made, okay, which will help them get to a better plane of health. But there isn't some golden bullet that, you know, this is the perfect mix. You know, yes, you can sway things, you can persuade the body that it needs to have a better balance of, you know, one type, but generally those are the farmer bacteria that then just help grow the normal flora out there. So yeah, all dogs are different, you know, as I keep saying, when it comes to feeding and you know, nutrient content and calorie requirements, you know, every dog's an individual, so trying to get a one size fits all is never going to happen.
No, and you may find that you get the test back and the type of bacteria that they're deficient in isn't available in capsule form or whatever, and yet you feed them probiotics and their body will make it anyway.
Yeah, and so actually the prebiotics is actually what Pet Biome do, and certainly the Equibiome for the horse side of things is actually, rather than sending you out bacteria, they actually give you a listing of some prebiotics that are really good to try and give your gut a boost.
Yeah,
or your dog's gut a boost.
Fantastic
In that case.
approach. That's kind of my favorite approach, really, to get the dog's body doing it, because the dog's body knows better than we do. Absolutely. So what else have we got here that's so bone broth always seems to bring up quite interesting, you know, because I mean, bone broth is a food type, it's not a medicine. So I mean, people are sort of saying, you know, how much do you give, how often do you give?
What's a medicine?
Question. Exactly. It's a functional food, really, which will have an impact, but
I would say there's a lot of foods out there that I would consider medicines. You know, it's all about, if anything that restores your health, you could consider to be a medicine. So, you know,
I think
at what point?
On the size of the dog, doesn't it, as well? The packet of bone broth that you purchase should have some kind of guideline, but it's also about using common sense in terms of, I have a tiny Chihuahua or I have a Labrador, how much would they eat? Because, you know, even a small
swimming in a bath is not what you want to be doing for your little Chihuahua. Bath of bone broth.
Labrador would love that. Soon be gone. So you better tell us a little bit about Raw Safe, because we've ploughed right over our.
Oh wow! Okay.
So the auditing that you're going to be introducing to the industry, I just think it's really, really amazing that this is happening.
Yeah. So this started off 2 years ago now. We had a conversation with actually Nick, myself, some of the raw producers, that actually there must be a better way than just DEFRA registration, okay, which really is what was out there. And then people were talking about PFMA, you know, membership and that side of things, which is actually the Pet Food Manufacturers Association. So, you know, that's not really auditing people in the same sense. I know that they are aiming to bring out an auditing thing very shortly, very much probably around the same time that ours is coming out. But ours is a little bit different in that it's backed by vets looking at what's going to make you know, the biggest change to foods. So how can we ensure that what you would expect in a normal kitchen, you know, sort of hygiene side of things is dealt with. You know, how the food that's coming in, is that, you know, appropriately kept at a right temperature, you know, for the manufacturing process, all the way through to how they're making sure that there's nothing foreign within that material that comes out the other end, how, you know, they're doing the bacterial testing and it's actually documented. They're not just sort of like saying that they're doing this, that they've gone through the right reporting mechanisms if they get a positive, that they are looking at making sure that the people within the manufacturing plant are appropriately trained, are handling things, are wearing all of the personal protective equipment, that it's not just written down somewhere and then people do what they like inside the manufacturing plant. That there's appropriate vermin control, just little things like that you would expect if you see, the hygiene, the food standards hygiene thing when you go into a restaurant, almost that sort of simplicity, so that the end user just sees the, raw safe mark on the food packaging, and they know that all of that checks has been done. Okay, that actually somebody independent, not hired by the food company, not paid for by the rest of the food companies in a club, but literally independent of those, is coming in, inspecting that plant, making sure that what is coming out the other end is what it says inside on the packaging, okay, is inside the packaging as well. And actually that is safe, hence the name raw safe. It makes sense, okay, and this is approved by vets. All right, so it's also encouraging vets to think, actually, if it's got that mark on, we know that we can recommend it because it's being produced to that standard, not that, we don't just throw it in the bin with all of the odd cases that, they've been reported in the paper of a case of E. coli that could have come from a certain food source. They know that actually, well, they're often down to sourcing of material that is not appropriate for feeding your dogs or having near you. We certainly don't want to be in the American situation of condemned meats, of the horrendous stuff that you'll see on there. If you've ever seen Pet Food, it's look at that, but it is the American story. And we're desperately trying to make sure that people are reassured that within the UK, we don't do 99% of what they talk about in that film. Okay, so let's try and take this forward. Let's give people a standard that they can hold up and say they can recognize the little red mark for, that's raw safe. And going forwards, we're due to go through that by the end of spring this year, so that you should start to see more and more people being audited and having the mark, the license to have the mark on their foods.
And how regularly will you be visiting?
So there's an annual audit that's done, but there's also then an on-spec audit which will be done in between those. And that's for those people that control their own feed lines to some degree. Okay, now there are companies that do have many companies that run through the same manufacturing plant, and that means that depending on what their sourcing is of foods, we would have to have increased levels of audits happening to just try and make sure that everybody is safeguarded at the end. Because if there's so many different scenarios here. There's some companies that make their own food to a great standard, and they wouldn't have any other ingredients within their plant, and they're checking all of that. And then there's other manufacturers that just go, yeah, okay, you've created your recipe, you send us the food, we'll put it through the plant and package it out the other end. And that has obviously loads of concerns over the quality of what's coming in. Has that been checked? Is that risk of contaminating the other feed lines that may make things more complex? So we're looking into that to make sure that the manufacturing plants are doing what they say on the label, okay, and that it's safe. And then the individuals that make that sell that food, if you like, that what people would see as the brands, can then be licensed to carry the mark, if they're producing to a standard. But it's really, really important. I think that the first lineup of people mainly are people that are making foods for themselves. We're sort of like talking to the others and working out for those that have more than one line going through, how we are going to need to increase their auditing.
Yes, makes sense. And of course, it's being created by people who are seasonal raw feeders, so they know raw food when they see it. They know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, there's vets and nurses from the veterinary industry that have looked at raw food feeding for years, for decades, that are right behind this. And the RFVS is also part, involved with making sure that the standards are appropriate. And this is something that's not just for the UK. This is something that should end up rolling out around Europe. And, we've got aims to go even as far afield as America and Canada and, South America, New Zealand. So all of those areas, we're hoping that, it's a standard that can be held out throughout the world.
Yeah.
So that's something that's really to be proud of. There's always going to be more things to do, more things to work on, more levels to work out. But right now, it's really important that we just try and get those people in the UK to understand what it's about, to feel secure and safe about feeding these particular brands that are holding the Raw Safe mark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fantastic. I'm pleased. So you're all going to be drawing straws to who gets the funded trip to America to do.
Well, no, you see, that's the thing. We are actually employing a really well-renowned group of veterinary auditors to go out. This is not something, in the very early days, we all joked about, well, we can just go out with a clipboard and work out who's who. But the downside is that, we're a friendly bunch at the RFVS, know so many of the manufacturers out there. And we felt that actually, to be fair, we needed an independent veterinary team that don't know the manufacturers from Adam and actually go out and audit them, because we don't want to hear of, well, I just had a little chat with them and I think they're doing it all right. They literally are going to be going through the paperwork. They're going to make sure that the stuff's done. There isn't a sort of easy line here. It is, you either pass or you don't pass. It's one of those. You've got to be going through the processes in order to get the mark.
Yeah. Okay. If any of you are watching and you want more information about Raw Safe, or if you want information about switching to Raw and want to know more about what we do at Naked Dog to minimize the risk for you, then you can head to our website and tell us the website. Is it Raw Safe? Is it within the vet's website?
You can actually go direct to rawsafe.co.uk. Okay, that will give lots of information about what we're doing. As one of the active arms, if you like, it is a company in its own right, set up to achieve this. But we are working in close conjunction with the RFVS. So if you want to know more about the RFVS position statement on relative risks, etc., of raw food feeding and how to get on there and do that right, lots of information on there. That's the rfvs.info site.
What I'll do afterwards is go through the questions. So I will answer your questions after this. And if there's any links to put up, I'm sure Brendan can send them over to me and I can add those for you as well. Just to say that I will be back Sunday with Caroline Wilkinson, who is a certified behaviourist, and she's going to be talking to us about puppies because of the launch of our Naked Pup Foods. We're doing a month of Sundays, Puppy Club Sundays, where we're going to be talking health and behaviour, well-being, all sorts of fun stuff, and loads of prizes. So, and not just food prizes, lots of fun puppy stuff that you can win. So 11 a.m. Sunday on this very page, we will be introducing Puppy Club. And thank you so much, Brendan, for being here tonight. We've obviously gone way over. So your dog's probably super happy because she got to sit by your feet for even longer.
Still snoozing.
Bless her. Okay. And yeah, we will be back for another Naked Truth. That will be next Tuesday. And we're going to be talking about herbs for dogs. So that's going to be an interesting one. Right. I think kind of forgotten in a way in all the whole probiotic rush and pandemonium to fill our dogs with probiotics. We forget that back in the day when these supplements weren't around, herbs is what we used all the time. I mean, I was
all of the bitters and things like that we talk about. Yeah,
they're wonderful. Absolutely. They're wonderful, and they're really good prebiotics as well sometimes. Anyway, so see you guys next week.
Thanks for your time.